June 19, 1944. 2:47 p.m. Lieutenant Alex Vratiu banks his F-6F Hellcat hard left at 24,000 feet above the Philippine Sea. His engine screams at maximum power, 200 horsepower, pushing him through air so thin it should be impossible. Below, 6 Japanese Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers crawl toward the American fleet like insects. Vratiu's fuel gauge shows 3/4 full. His manifold pressure reads 60 inches, a number that would have exploded any engine just 3 years earlier. He rolls inverted and dives. In the next 4 minutes, he will shoot down 6 enemy aircraft without his engine even coughing. The Japanese pilots never understood what hit them. Their engines running on 87-octane fuel simply couldn't compete. Before we continue with what gave Vratiu this impossible advantage, we need your help to keep these forgotten technical victories alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of innovation and engineering from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Perth to Pittsburgh, from Tokyo to Toronto. Are you an engineer? Did your grandfather work in the oil industry? Do you have a connection to aviation history? We want to hear from you. Now back to June 1944, where American pilots were flying machines the Japanese High Command had declared technically impossible. Alex Vratiu grew up in East Chicago, Indiana, in a neighborhood that smelled like steel mills and oil refineries. His father worked at Standard Oil's Whiting Refinery, the largest in America, processing crude into everything from kerosene to motor oil. Young Alex spent summers watching tanker trucks line up at the gates, each one carrying fuel that would end up in cars, ships, trains. He never imagined that one day, a specific type of fuel, a grade of gasoline most people had never heard of, would determine who lived and who died in the skies above the Pacific. In 1938, when Vratiu was 17, his father brought home a technical bulletin from the refinery. It described something called 100-octane aviation fuel, gasoline so refined, so pure, that it allowed engines to run at pressures and temperatures previously impossible. His father explained it simply. Regular gas knocks and explodes too early. This stuff burns smooth even when you compress it to hell. Alex didn't understand the chemistry. He just knew it sounded like science fiction. He enlisted in the Navy in 1941, 3 weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was 20 years old, 5'9", 160 pounds soaking wet. During flight training in Pensacola, Florida, his instructors noticed something unusual. Vratiu had an almost instinctive understanding of engine management. While other cadets focused on stick and rudder skills, Vratiu obsessed over manifold pressure gauges, fuel mixture controls, cylinder head temperatures. He treated his aircraft engine like a living thing that needed constant attention. His first assignment was to VF-6, flying F-4F Wildcats off the carrier USS Intrepid. The Wildcat was a decent aircraft, tough, reliable, but slow and underpowered compared to the Japanese Zero. In early 1943, the squadron transitioned to the new F-6F Hellcat. The difference was staggering. The Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine produced 200 horsepower on something called military power and could push even higher on war emergency power. The secret? Every drop of fuel flowing into that engine was 100 octane. Vratiu's best friend was Ensign Robert Bobby Duncan from Mobile, Alabama. Duncan was a natural pilot, smooth, confident, always joking. He and Vratiu made plans for after the war. They'd open a flight school together, maybe down in Florida where the weather was perfect year-round. Duncan and Vratiu Aviation. They shook hands on it one humid evening in April 1943, sitting on the deck of the Intrepid under a sky full of stars. Duncan died on May 2, 1943, during a raid on Rabaul. His engine quit at 18,000 feet, not from enemy fire, but from bad fuel. A tanker had delivered contaminated gasoline to the fleet, diluted with water and impurities. Duncan's engine coughed once, twice, then seized. He ditched in the ocean 15 miles from friendly ships. They never found his body. Between January and August 1943, the Navy lost 43 aircraft to fuel-related engine failures, 43 pilots and aircrew, Not shot down, not killed in combat. Dead because the fuel in their tanks wasn't pure enough, wasn't refined enough, wasn't the right octane. Vrasiu attended Duncan's memorial service on the Intrepid's flight deck. The chaplain said the usual words about sacrifice and duty, but Vrasiu kept thinking about his father's refinery, about those tanker trucks, about the difference between 87 octane and 100 octane. It wasn't just numbers on a technical bulletin. It was life and death. What Vrasiu didn't know, what most American pilots didn't know, was that the fuel in their tanks represented one of the greatest industrial achievements in human history, an achievement that would determine the outcome of the entire Pacific War. In 1940, the United States produced exactly 0 gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel for military use. 0. The technology existed, but the infrastructure didn't. Refineries were tooled for 87-octane gasoline, perfectly adequate for cars and trucks, completely inadequate for high-performance aircraft engines. The Army Air Corps and Navy had maybe 40 gallons of 100-octane fuel in total, most of it imported from small refineries in Britain and the Netherlands. The Japanese High Command knew this. In early 1941, Japanese naval intelligence prepared a report on American fuel production capacity. Their conclusion: the United States could not possibly produce 100-octane fuel in militarily significant quantities. The chemistry was too complex. The refining process was too expensive. The infrastructure was too specialized. One Japanese admiral called American claims about future 100-octane production fantasy thinking and propaganda for weak minds. Japan's own fuel situation was catastrophic. The Japanese had no domestic oil production. They imported crude from the Dutch East Indies, Borneo and Burma, all of which they would need to capture and hold to continue the war. Their refineries produced mostly 87-octane fuel for aircraft, with small amounts of 92-octane for elite fighter units. Japanese chemists had tried to develop 100-octane fuel. They failed. The process required specific catalysts, precise temperature controls, and refining techniques that Japanese industry simply couldn't master. In the spring of 1940, President Roosevelt gave a direct order to the oil industry: develop the capacity to produce 100-octane aviation fuel in massive quantities. Not thousands of gallons, millions, eventually billions. The man who would make it possible was Eugene Houdry, a French mechanical engineer who had immigrated to the United States in 1930. Houdry had developed a process called catalytic cracking, a method of refining crude oil using special catalysts and high temperatures to break down heavy hydrocarbons into lighter, higher-octane components. His process could turn low-grade crude into high-octane gasoline at industrial scale. Standard Oil, Sun Oil, Shell, and a dozen other companies began building new refineries and retrofitting old ones. The engineering was brutal. Catalytic cracking units operated at 900 degrees Fahrenheit under high pressure. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the entire unit could explode, killing everyone nearby. Between 1940 and 1942, 11 workers died in refinery accidents related to 100-octane production. The investment was staggering. Standard Oil's Bayway refinery in New Jersey spent $40 million, roughly $800 million in today's money, to build a single catalytic cracking unit capable of producing 15,000 barrels per day of 100-octane fuel. Shell's Martinez refinery in California spent even more. By 1942, the United States had 18 refineries capable of producing 100-octane fuel. By 1943, that number had grown to 47. The logistics were equally complex. 100-octane fuel couldn't be transported in regular tankers. It was too volatile, too prone to contamination. The military built a fleet of specialized tankers with sealed compartments, temperature controls, and filtration systems. They established fuel depots across the Pacific: Pearl Harbor, Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, each one stocked with thousands of barrels of 100-octane fuel shipped directly from American refineries. By mid-1943, the United States was producing 90 million gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel per month. By mid-1944, That number had reached 150 million gallons per month. The Japanese, meanwhile, were producing perhaps 2 million gallons per month of 92-octane fuel, a grade still inferior to American 100-octane. The difference showed up in combat immediately. Lieutenant Vratu noticed it first during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the engagement that would become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. He was flying combat air patrol when the first wave of Japanese aircraft appeared on radar. More than 300 enemy planes, mostly carrier-based fighters and bombers, headed toward the American fleet. Vratu and his squadron climbed to intercept. His Hellcat's engine ran smooth and cool even at full military power. The manifold pressure gauge showed 54 inches, a reading that represented combustion pressures no Japanese engine could sustain. He pushed the throttle forward to war emergency power, 60 inches of manifold pressure, 200 horsepower, fuel consumption of 350 gallons per hour. The engine didn't knock, it didn't overheat, it didn't hesitate. Below him, Japanese fighters struggled to climb above 20,000 feet. Their engines running on 87 to 92-octane fuel simply couldn't generate enough power in the thin air. Every time a Japanese pilot tried to firewall his throttle, his engine would detonate, pre-ignition caused by low-octane fuel igniting too early under high compression. The result was catastrophic engine knock that damaged pistons, crankshafts, valves. Vratu dove on the first formation of Judy dive bombers. He fired a 2-second burst. The lead bomber exploded. He shifted aim to the second bomber. Another burst, another explosion. In 4 minutes, he shot down 6 Japanese aircraft. His wingman, Ensign Homer Brockmeyer from San Antonio, Texas, shot down 4 more. Together, 10 kills in less than 5 minutes. The Japanese couldn't climb fast enough to escape. They couldn't dive fast enough to outrun the Hellcats. They couldn't turn tight enough to evade. American pilots controlled every aspect of the engagement because their engines produced 30 to 40% more power than Japanese engines at altitude. After the battle, Vratu landed back on the Lexington with 200 gallons of fuel remaining, enough for another hour of combat. His engine gauges showed normal temperatures, normal pressures, no damage, no wear. The engine had run at war emergency power for 20 minutes straight, something that should have destroyed it. Instead, it was ready to fly again immediately. That evening, the squadron intelligence officer compiled the results. American fighters had shot down 243 Japanese aircraft. The Americans lost 23 planes, mostly to anti-aircraft fire, not enemy fighters. The kill ratio was better than 10-1. What the intelligence officer didn't include in his report, what he didn't know to include, was that the real kill ratio was between 100-octane fuel and 87-octane fuel. The pilots were brave on both sides. The tactics were sound on both sides. But American engines could do things Japanese engines simply couldn't. Across the Pacific, Japanese pilots and maintenance crews struggled to understand what was happening. Captured intelligence reports from 1944 show their confusion and growing desperation. One report from a Japanese Naval Air Group commander on Tinian Island, dated July 1944, describes American aircraft operating at impossible altitudes with impossible endurance. The commander notes that American fighters routinely patrol at 25, Euro 0 to 30, Euro feet for hours, while Japanese fighters struggle to reach 22, Euro feet, and can maintain that altitude for only brief periods. He speculates that American engines must be using some kind of oxygen injection system or special superchargers unknown to Japanese engineering. He was half right. American engines did use sophisticated superchargers, but the real secret was the fuel. High-octane fuel allowed those superchargers to compress air to much higher pressures without causing detonation. More air compression meant more power at altitude. It was simple thermodynamics. But without 100-octane fuel, it was impossible. Another report from September 1944, captured after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, comes from a Japanese aviation engineer assigned to analyze damaged American engines recovered from crashed aircraft. The engineer notes that American cylinder heads show unusual wear patterns consistent with extreme operating pressures, and concludes that American pilots must be ignoring engine limitations and accepting shorter engine life in exchange for temporary power increases. He was wrong. American engines weren't wearing out faster. They were designed to operate at those pressures continuously because 100-octane fuel made it possible. Japanese engineers working with 87 to 92-octane fuel simply couldn't imagine engines that ran reliably at 60 inches of manifold pressure. By late 1944, Japanese fuel supplies were collapsing. American submarines had sunk most of the tankers bringing crude oil from the Dutch East Indies. Japanese refineries targeted by B-29 bombing raids were operating at reduced capacity. Fuel quality declined even further. Some Japanese units were mixing aviation fuel with alcohol or benzene to stretch supplies, a desperate measure that made engines even less reliable. In December 1944, a captured Japanese pilot told American interrogators that his unit's fighters were flying coffins because the engines quit without warning. He said pilots had stopped using full throttle because it almost always caused engine failure. Japanese fighters, once feared for their maneuverability and range, had become slow and cautious, unable to climb, unable to chase, unable to fight effectively. The final accounting of America's 100-octane fuel production is staggering. Between 1940 and 1945, American refineries produced more than 20 billion gallons of 100-octane aviation fuel. 20 billion. That's roughly 635 million barrels, enough to fill a swimming pool the size of Manhattan to a depth of 10 feet. Japan, during the same period, produced approximately 180 million gallons of 92-octane fuel, their highest grade. The ratio was more than 100 to 1. The impact on combat effectiveness was absolute. In 1942, during the early battles around Guadalcanal, American pilots flying Wildcats on 100-octane fuel achieved a kill ratio of roughly 1:5 to 1 against Japanese Zeros. By 1943, with improved aircraft and better tactics, that ratio climbed to 5 to 1. By 1944, flying Hellcats and Corsairs, the ratio reached 10 to 1. By 1945, it approached 15 to 1. Historians often attribute this to better pilot training, superior aircraft design, and effective tactics. All true. But underlying everything was fuel. American pilots could climb higher, fly faster, maneuver harder, and stay aloft longer because their engines ran on 100-octane fuel. Japanese pilots, no matter how skilled or brave, couldn't overcome the fundamental limitation of low-octane fuel in high-performance engines. The B-29 Superfortress, which would eventually drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, couldn't have existed without 100-octane fuel. Each B-29 carried 8 gallons of fuel and consumed it at nearly 1 gallons per hour during high-altitude bombing runs. The Wright R-3350 engines powering the B-29 required 100-octane fuel to generate 200 horsepower per engine. On lower-octane fuel, the engines would have destroyed themselves within hours. Navy fighters defending carrier task forces routinely flew 6-hour combat air patrol missions, maintaining altitude and speed the entire time. That kind of endurance was only possible because 100-octane fuel allowed engines to run efficiently at cruise power settings that would have caused detonation and failure with lower-octane fuel. Even the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, depended indirectly on 100-octane fuel. The uranium enrichment facilities at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, required enormous amounts of electricity generated by power plants that ran on oil and coal, transported by ships and trains running on petroleum products, all part of the same industrial infrastructure that produced 100-octane fuel. Yet despite this enormous contribution to victory, the story of 100-octane fuel remains largely unknown. There are no memorials to the refinery workers who died building catalytic cracking units. No documentaries about the chemists and engineers who solved the technical problems. No monuments to Eugene Houdry, whose catalytic cracking process made it all possible. After the war, Alex Vraciu returned to East Chicago. He married his high school sweetheart, Helen, and they had 3 children. He took a job at his father's old refinery, Standard Oil's Whiting plant, working as an engineer in the aviation fuel division. He spent 30 years there, helping to develop jet fuel and other petroleum products for civilian aviation. He rarely talked about the war. When people asked about his 19 confirmed kills, making him one of the Navy's top aces, he would shrug and say he was lucky, that he had a good airplane and good fuel. He never elaborated on that last part. In 1978, a local newspaper reporter writing a feature on World War II veterans interviewed Vraciu. The reporter asked what made the difference in the Pacific Air War. Vraciu thought for a moment, then said, "Two things, training and fuel. We had both. They had one." The reporter didn't understand the fuel comment and left it out of the article. Vraciu died in 2015 at the age of 96. His obituary in the Chicago Tribune mentioned his Distinguished Flying Cross, his Navy Cross, and his 19 victories. It said nothing about fuel, nothing about octane ratings, nothing about the industrial miracle that made his victories possible. Eugene Houdry, the inventor of catalytic cracking, died in 1962 at the age of 70. His obituary mentioned his contributions to petroleum refining, but didn't connect his work to World War II aviation fuel. Most people who read it had no idea that his invention had helped win the war. There is a small display about 100-octane fuel at the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas. It includes a single 55-gallon drum marked 100-octane aviation fuel for military use only, and a brief explanation of octane ratings. Most visitors walk past it without stopping. At Standard Oil's old Whiting refinery, now owned by BP, there's a memorial plaque for the 11 workers who died in accidents while building and operating the catalytic cracking units during the war. The plaque doesn't mention 100-octane fuel specifically. It just says they died in service to their country during wartime production. Their names are listed: Thomas Morrison, Chicago; Edward Chen, Gary; James Kowalski; Hammond; Robert O'Brien; Whiting, and 7 others. The strategic impact of 100-octane fuel on World War II cannot be overstated. It gave the United States and its allies an insurmountable advantage in air combat, an advantage that translated directly into control of the skies over Europe and the Pacific. Without 100-octane fuel, the B-17 and B-24 bomber campaigns over Germany would have been impossible. Without it, the P-51 Mustang couldn't have escorted bombers deep into German territory. Without it, the island-hopping campaign across the Pacific would have been far bloodier and longer. Japan's strategic planners understood this too late. In early 1942, when Japan controlled the Dutch East Indies and access to crude oil, they could have invested in catalytic cracking technology and 100-octane fuel production. They chose not to. Japanese chemists insisted it was too difficult, too expensive, too complex. By 1943, when they realized their mistake, it was too late. American submarines had cut off their oil supplies, and American bombers were destroying their refineries. The lesson is simple but profound. Wars are won not just by soldiers and weapons, but by the industrial and technological infrastructure that supports them. The American oil industry in World War II performed a miracle of production and engineering that rivaled the Manhattan Project in complexity and exceeded it in strategic impact. 20 billion gallons of 100-octane fuel, each gallon representing chemistry, engineering, logistics, and human effort, gave American and Allied pilots the power to dominate the skies. And it happened because of men like Eugene Houdry, who understood chemistry, men like Alex Vraciu's father, who worked night shifts at refineries, men like Thomas Morrison and Edward Chen, who died building the equipment, and pilots like Alex Vraciu, who trusted that when they pushed the throttle forward, their engines would respond. If this story moved you, hit that like button. These technical achievements are just as important as battlefield heroics, and they deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories about the engineers, scientists, and workers who won World War II from behind the scenes. And drop a comment. Tell us if you've ever worked in the oil industry, if you know someone who did, or if you have a family connection to wartime production. We read every comment. Thank you for keeping these memories alive.